Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About History. My name is Michael Paul Hurd and I'm the owner of Lineage Independent Publishing and also the author of my own Lineage series of historical fiction novels. One of the things that comes up repeatedly in the launch parties for my novels is what inspires me? What do I use for the inspiration for my storylines? And that's really kind of an interesting question. I'd like to try to answer for my viewers. It goes back a little bit to about 10 or 11 years ago. Well, actually longer than that. More like 15 years ago. Our oldest son Adam, who passed away sadly in 2010, was starting to get interested in family research. And he started sending me newspaper clippings of relatives, my father, my grandmother, and places where he had found information about them that I didn't even know was there. Like, for example, my grandmother was a domestic in St. Joseph, Michigan during the Great Depression. And my father, before he went away to college, had won a couple of science competitions. I guess he was a bit of a geek in junior high school and high school. But so anyway, Adam's research kind of pushed me along the way to my own genealogical research, and then led me to write my own series of historical fiction novels. So we're going to focus today on book 3 of my Lineage series, which is entitled Iniquity and Retribution. Now, what inspired that storyline? The story that I compiled in that book was a continuation of what I believe happened or could have happened in fiction following the murder of my great-great-grandfather, Ira L. Hurd, in Allegan, Michigan on September 24th, 1984. The story for the book comes from kind of the backstory of that murder, and he was actually present when my great-grandfather was actually present when his father, my great-great-grandfather, was murdered by who knows. And that's what made the story kind of interesting. The book itself picks up after the incident. The incident happened on September 24th, 1894. And I'd like to think that what was behind it was that my biological great-great-grandmother was having an affair. And you look in the marriage rolls for Allegan County, Michigan in 1879, that's Ira Hurd and Elizabeth Garberson, she was known as Lizzie, got married, and they were 7 years apart in age. He was a entrepreneur of sorts, and of course, in keeping with the time of her day, or the customs of her day, she stayed home and took care of the kids in the house. So they were married on July 3rd in 1879 in Hopkins, Michigan, and she was 17, he was 26. So for her that was nothing unusual. For him, again, probably not all that unusual for the 1890s. Now, her parents were Daniel Garberson and Susan Ann Perkins. Garberson was a Civil War veteran. He was assigned to the 6th Michigan Infantry of the Union Army, which became the 6th Michigan Heavy Artillery in 1863. And this regiment spent most of its time in the South and was one of the first Union regiments to occupy New Orleans in 1862. Now, Private Garberson appeared to have been eligible for an invalid's pension from the Union Army. Now, his unit itself lost 2 officers and 78 men in combat action, but disease took a greater toll on the unit itself, with 6 officers and 498 enlisted men dying from disease. In other words, 86% of the entire regiment's, the total losses for the regiment in this Civil War were the result of disease, not from combat action. And of course, he ultimately returned to Michigan and his home. Now, moving ahead, his daughter Lizzie marries Ira Hurd, and in 1894, Ira decided that he was going to go away for the night and go someplace else. The inference that I gather from all the newspaper clippings of the day was that Ira thought that Lizzie was having an affair, and so he kind of stalked the outside of their house that night. And the way the story goes is that he climbed back into the house. She thought it was an intruder and shot him. And he lived for a very short period of time. But their son, Leroy Hurd, who's my great-grandfather, witnessed the whole thing. And I'm sure that even though firearms and shootings were pretty commonplace in that period of time, hands-on or firsthand knowledge and firsthand witnessing of an event like that was sure to have traumatized the young Leroy. And so going on from there, the court case took a couple of months. Ira was allegedly shot by his wife, but she tended to suggest that somebody, or the coroner's inquest determined that somebody else may have ultimately shot him. So, you know, they didn't have ballistics and fingerprint and gunshot residue tests back in 1894. So, you know, it was kind of weird. Now, in the long run of things, the newspaper articles surrounding it kind of cast all kinds of aspersions on Mr. Ludlow, who was allegedly Lizzie's lover, and Lizzie herself. And the case went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and even made the newspapers as far away as Washington, D.C., and even the Journal newspaper in Baltimore, Maryland. So it was a really interesting case from a forensic standpoint, in that it got the attention of newspapers miles away from where it happened. And so, you know, of course, you know, like this one headline says right here, it says the public was much interested in the case. So as the story goes, young Leroy was there, and he actually allegedly told his mother, Lizzie, that, Mama, you didn't know what you were doing. And I'd like to think that she did. I'd like to think that even if they couldn't prove that that particular revolver was fired, that perhaps her lover was actually in the house at the time, and maybe he shot Ira. But who knows? I mean, there's just so much unknown in the entire case. The end result was that about 60 days later, the case was nolle prossed, which means that the prosecution decided that they didn't have enough evidence to continue their case. And so she was, you know, still around, still living in and around Allegan, Michigan at the time. So, you know, it was, I would say it was one of the more interesting murder cases of the time, particularly in that part of southwestern Michigan. So, but the funny thing was that not long after the murder, Lizzie remarried, and she married a gentleman by the last name of Martin, and not Ludlow, who was her alleged lover at the time that her first husband was shot, but another man who was named Martin, and then went on from there to have, I think, at least 2 more husbands. That I don't know what the disposition was. I know Martin died, but the other 2, there's very little information. So, you know, it's really an interesting case. My great-grandmother, Myrtle Smith Hurd, kept very detailed handwritten notes, and she had listings of Lizzie Garberson possibly marrying 3 times after the 1894 death of her first husband, Ira L. Hurd, who was, of course, her husband's father, Leroy's father. So it was really, really interesting in that respect. Now, here's an interesting photograph. If you count from the left of the picture, the 4th person from the left is Lizzie Garberson Hurd Martin. So this picture was taken, had to have been taken sometime after 1910, because Leroy and Myrtle weren't married yet. And so Lizzie died in 1927. So there's about a 17-year window there. But it's really odd to be able to find some of these old photographs. So, this led to the storyline for Lineage Series Book 3, Iniquity and Retribution. And it was so much fun to write, but it was also kind of creepy at the same time. Because although it was based loosely on the characters of my great-grandparents, the true fact was that the railroad person mentioned in the book, the railroad mail service person in the book, was in fact my great-grandfather, and then the social worker in the book was my great-grandmother. And my first cousin once removed, living out in Oregon, Vincent Hurd, told me that I captured the personalities of those 2 individuals quite accurately. The storylines themselves, however, were contrived, but the personality aspects, he said, even though you didn't know them that well, if at all. I mean, I met my great-grandmother Hurd twice or 3 times before I was a teenager, and then she died in 1974, I believe. Meanwhile, her husband, Leroy, had been dead since 1954, so I had never met him, naturally. But, long story short, what I did know from my personal interaction with my great-grandmother Hurd was that she was not only a teetotaler and a card-carrying member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, but it was also very prejudiced and bigoted. And I'll just leave those details alone, because she had no problem speaking her mind, and you knew exactly what she thought about everybody who wasn't a Women's Christian Temperance Union, teetotaling, Bible-carrying Christian woman. And anybody that wasn't like her, just, she had no tolerance for. So anyway, so that's the background behind what inspired the story for Lineage Series Book 3. I hope you enjoyed this brief discussion, brief presentation, and I will be doing these periodically for the next several months as I gather up my research that went behind the production of each of my novels. So this was Let's Talk About History, what inspires the storylines from my novels. My name is Michael Paul Hurd. I'm the owner of Lineage Independent Publishing. I hope that you enjoyed me stumbling along through this. This is my first solo presentation here on YouTube, and I look forward to having you join me again in the future.